All right, welcome to this week's roundtable. It's going to be three nutritionists talking about training, and you might think, stay in your lane, you bloody nutritionists. But actually, we all have experience in the fitness side of things as well. I'm currently a CrossFit coach still. Tom and Mac have done their fair share of PTing and programming as well. So we actually, we are still kind of in our lane, and that's what we're chatting about today. And I guess one of the main things I want to talk about is helping people start to match their training, I guess their frequency, their volume, their intensity, their type with their purpose for training and their values and also their goals. Because quite a lot of the time I still see it now, coaching CrossFit, a bit of a misalignment between how much people are training and also what they want to get out of training.
Yeah, I think there's a few layers here, but I think the thing we should always start with is the modality of training. Before we start worrying about volume and intensity and sort of these type things, let's just look at the type of training. I find, and this is also speaking about my previous self, is people get sucked into training modalities for controlling sources of motivation. Like what might happen if I don't do my training? I'm going to lose muscle. I'm not going to look this way. I'm not going to be as fit, really tying their identity to one form of motivation, even though it's something that they maybe don't really enjoy. And actually, it's not what their true identity is. For example, in my situation, I found myself training like a bodybuilder. And then a few years later, realizing that I am nothing of that sort of person. And I don't like the idea of being that sort of person. And all of a sudden, I've been training like this and missing out on other activities and basically culled other activities that got in the way of the effectiveness of that training, other activities that I enjoyed more, but also that, wouldn't have had any difference on, really the outcome if I kept them in. But I was unhealthfully obsessed with one form of training because I was fearful of what might happen if I let anything else get in the way.
Yeah, and I like that, Mac, because I think the question that begs is what the actual why is, or like what the actual purpose is. Because I think we can masquerade that the goal, like in your case, the goal is to be like as jacked and muscular as possible. But that wasn't necessarily the goal that you valued the most. That was sort of the goal you grew to think you wanted, if that makes sense. And if we can sort of step back and go, oh, what is the point here? It then lets us be informed about our modality with a much better like level of precision. Either because the modality matters a lot, like if you do really care about bodybuilding, you have to be doing relatively specific work there. Like you might not have to be all the way there, but you're gonna have to do some, or at least a lot of it. Whereas if your goal is more, you know, I want to feel good as I get older, or like I want to be broadly health seeking, the bar of specificity gets way lower for you.
Yeah, I think that's where that asking yourself the question of like, what do I want from training? And that's really going to shape your choice for the modality. Like what type? It could be bodybuilding, it could be CrossFit, it could be Pilates, it could be yoga, it could be a team sport, anything, right? Running, trail running, rock climbing, right? And then knowing that the less specific your goal is, the more options you can to trial and experiment.
Yeah, I really think like unless you are pursuing one very specific goal, like I want to be a bodybuilder and compete in bodybuilding, then the options of activities that you can do that yield the outcome that you want, which in the case of someone who isn't trying to be a bodybuilder, could be anything from like feeling good to improving health to just being a little bit fitter, maybe a little bit stronger, or just a little bit more robust. The amount of activities that you can do that ticks those boxes and moves in that direction is almost like infinite. And one thing I've noticed is, through practice anecdotally, is so many folks who aren't like their goal isn't specific and doesn't require a specific form of training. They think that they have to do a specific form of training to reach their goal. And they're not privy to the fact that actually their goal doesn't warrant any meaningful level of specificity. And actually, the priority in terms of the training modality, and we're not even talking volume or any of that stuff yet. We're just talking about the type of not even training, but just movement. Where the biggest priority should actually be what's safe, what's enjoyable, to be honest. And a lot of like real hectic, precise techo people are going to be like, oh, who are you, mate? You're a nutritionist. But look, if we think about it, always comes back to principles. We have the goal, and then we have the principles, whether it be training or nutrition, that feed back up towards the goal. And it's just undeniable that most people do not really need to worry about specificity to any large degree. And the enjoyment factor just is skyrockets ahead in terms of importance.
And say, like, to go down that line of thought, if you are someone for whom the specificity matters, I'd ask, is it specificity in like an inclusive sense or an exclusive sense? So you might really want bigger biceps, and actually it'd be unreasonable if you didn't. I'm going to put that out there as a position stance from the FNC boys. But like, if you really want bigger biceps, you need to do a bicep curl, right? But that doesn't preclude you from doing other things as well, which I think is like, if you're someone who, I don't know, you might enjoy yoga or Pilates, you can just sprinkle the bicep curls on top of it. And that's also a good thing to calibrate your level of commitment, right? Do you want to exclude everything else? Or do you want to engage with this as well as do other things?
Yeah, another bit to that, like within that, Tom, is, okay, we want bigger biceps, right? But how bad do we want bigger biceps? Do we want bigger biceps to the point where all the other things that we find fun, we get rid of? And everything we do within our day is geared towards exclusively getting bigger biceps. And for some folks, maybe that's the case. Good on you, Chief, if that's you. But it's easy to get sucked into that goal and think, I need to cull everything else that gets in the way that might impact the recovery of and the adaptations of my biceps. So there's no more surfing. There's no more, playing tennis. There's no more nothing that involves not even just arm movement, but anything that's going to steal recovery capabilities away from the biceps. And I think people need to think like, well, how important, like, is this really actually that important to me, where I am pursuing every little 1% of bicep growth at the expense of doing things that make me happy? And I think that's a really key question to ask, because it's okay to want to have big biceps and it's okay to want to do training specific to that. But it's like, what else are you taking out? And like Tom said, it's like inclusive or exclusive. That's the thing here.
Yeah. Well, and I often ask people, like, also with nutrition, right? I'll often ask people, what aren't you willing to do? Because there isn't a human alive who doesn't have a point where they're not willing to do the thing. Like, there's, all of us have I don't know, you've got to never bicep curl again to save your family's life or whatever. Like, there's a point for all of us. And for some people that might mean like anabolic steroid use. Like, okay, you're willing to do everything except this, or you're willing to train it twice a week, but you're not willing to do a third. But I think asking what you're not willing to do normalizes there being a point where you will stop. And that's really important, because so many people in a professional context want to tell their coach, want to tell their trainer, I'm willing to do anything, because then people go, oh, that's really hardcore. Like, I'm willing to get my before and after photos done while my wife's in labor. People like, I wouldn't say that unless I had seen it.
Find a way to do it.
This is a call out. If you know, you know. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? Like, there probably should be a limit as to what you're willing to do to achieve your goals.
Yeah. What is the trade-off? Like, seriously, if you are so obsessed with bodybuilding, like I remember like those days, Mac, when you were like, trying to do all this, but you weren't surfing then, and you were a completely different person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's fucking nuts.
Yeah.
Ooh, and you just get so sucked into something.
Like, to be fair, I think there is really something. Yeah, well, and I think that's kind of nice. Like, I definitely think it was good for me, particularly in that like late teens, early 20s stage of my life, to have a thing I was so devoted to, right? Because that can sort of keep you on track and give you a bit of existential meaning. But it's also just like generally like, provided it's done in a healthy way, it can be really productive for you. It can teach you a lot of lessons. So I think it's really important that we're not sort of straw manning being dedicated to a thing. But it's also acknowledging that this is a deliberate and at times like arbitrary decision to like optimize things because we're choosing to walk that path, as opposed to because it's going to give us necessarily far superior results.
Yeah. And I think like we've touched on a few times, it's nice to know there's options out there. It's not just, okay, I want to exercise, or I have to exercise, so I have to go to the gym. Like you actually don't. You could be a really fit and strong person without ever even stepping inside a gym as well. And when someone says, "Oh, I just hate exercise," like, have you really explored all the options out there? And again, what do you want from training? Do you want to be a fitter and healthier version of yourself? Then okay, look, let's try and find an option that you can try, you can experiment with to help you be that fitter and healthier version of yourself.
I think when people say I hate training, a lot of the time that comes from a place of thinking that training is this very narrow thing, that's the thing that they don't like, and not realizing that I don't even the term training, I think for a lot of people we shouldn't be calling it, oh, I'm going to the gym to do training, or I'm going to a training session. It should just be like, I'm just going to do a movement thing. Like I'm just going to move my body, because unless you're training for a specific outcome that is like, requires a specificity, it's not really training. It should just be like moving my body for health. And yeah, you're training your fitness, you might be training your strength, but I don't think that's the crux of what you're trying to get out of it. Like, we're not anti-dedication or being dedicated. And, in my experience, like, yeah, I spent a few years of my life chasing a goal that I realized after wasn't important to me, and it wasn't, the person who I wanted, and I dedicated time, money, effort, energy, and mental resources to it. But I learned so much about myself from it, to the point where and I learned so much about nutrition as well, to the point where I freaking have a career in it. And I can't say I have regrets from that. I can't say I have regrets. And I think this is also the thing, like, even if a goal isn't good for someone, we spoke about this, actually, Josh, you spoke about it with,
Ella.
where sometimes you've just got to let people do what they want to do, keep them safe, and then let them come to their own realization that actually shit, because someone probably could have done the full values crap with me. No, it's not values crap, I just it's good.
Yeah.
It could have done the full values schmozzle with me, right? And said to me, oh, you shouldn't pursue this muscle building, bodybuilding thing. Like, I think you should start surfing again. They could have said that to me, and I would have gone, get it, like, who the fuck are you? And I would have done it anyway, But then now that I've done it and I've been through that, like I said, like, you learn stuff, and no regrets.
No regrets.
I think
No regrets.
part of that too is, sure, someone probably couldn't have been like, you do realize that the thing you actually value is surfing, but like, I think there's avenue for someone in like a coaching or like a mentory style position to go, hey, you could also include this. And if you were to, this is how we would make it happen. And I think that's where, like, I still, like, probably about half my work is still like writing programs and stuff. I think part of the real like benefit in personalized programming is because it lets you include those things. Like, if you want to be a really good powerlifter, but you also want to surf a couple of times a week, sure, you might get 98% of the way there. I'd argue if it keeps you doing it longer, you will actually get better.
Good point.
The whole point of like customizing the system, right, is if this is a thing you value, you can have those two things concurrently. And sure, there might be a tiny bit of optimality you sacrifice, maybe, but probably not when we talk what you're doing in 5 years' time.
Yeah, but also, like, I think if we think about adherence and enjoyment being such a big factor, and not in like enjoyment of your lifestyle being a really big factor of adherence. So finding something you can actually adhere to. So again, finding the training you enjoy, but sprinkling in other things so that you're not sacrificing, so you can go for a run with your friends. You can still play like soccer or basketball or tennis, without worrying about your biceps being, too sore, or, you can't do your preacher curls the next day. Like, making sure that you can fit all these things in, and that you are still going to, be that person that you want to be, right? So like, don't worry about optimality, because what's the point of a 5% optimization if it leads to a 10%, decrease in the quality of your life, or even potentially adherence?
I think, yeah, like 100%. It's like, what cost are you willing to cop, and the cost to your life enjoyment and happiness to pursue optimality? Like, even being 98% towards optimal, but being much happier because you're able to do, say, go for a surf as a powerlifter or something. Like, is that worth it? Like, is being the 100% optimal, not even 98%, but 100%, is that really worth that 2% or that big decline on life enjoyment? I think, yeah, in a lot of instances, the answer would be no, but people don't want to hear that. And look, I understand why people don't want to hear that. And I was once that person.
Well, I guess to that, Mac, do you think, I guess if we have this idea of the lifetime PB, do you think you would have ended up more muscular and more ripped if you'd never stopped surfing while you were pursuing bodybuilding?
It's a really good question. See, surfing is a unique sport. And this is where it has a lot of differences to other sports. If you want to do surfing properly, not even optimal, but just properly, you have to really build your life around it. You have to have a flexible schedule, because, there might only be a 1-2 hour window in a day where the waves are good. And that's dependent on the tide or something. Surfing is a sport where if you're doing other gym style training, you can't really get away with having a fixed program if you want to do surfing properly. Like, so I think surfing's a unique thing because it's so condition dependent. So I actually do think that if I kept surfing, I would have been less jacked. But I would have been much happier. And I get jacked anyway.
Well, no, but I also think, like, if you're, especially as a natural bodybuilder, yeah, like if you're peak, quote unquote, peaking in terms of how muscular you are in your early to mid 20s, you're not actually peaking. Like, that's a process which is probably going to happen early 30s to potentially like late 30s, just simply because you need those years of quality training to accrue that tissue. So Josh is very much, the Jack Daddy of the three of us.
And I got dad strength too.
Yeah. Well, and I think like really leaning into, if you burn out on a thing, it actually stops you ever getting better at it in that 5 years time, right?
Yeah. This is my argument against going all in on something.
It's really funny, Tom. I remember a while back, we were talking about bicep training. Like, this is ages ago. And you were saying, like, you just do like a set of biceps or triceps at the end of your training sessions. And then at one stage you were like, oh yeah, I got some guns on me, bro. Something along those lines. Like, you haven't really focused on bicep training or arm training. You don't really enjoy it. You just do it consistently at the end of your training sessions. And it's like, it's so funny because I used to, like, arms was my favorite thing about training. Like, I used to just be like, oh, I can't wait to just do biceps and triceps in the session. And if I did a training session that was just arms, I'd be frothing. I'd be like, oh, fuck you boys. Now, bro, arms is the thing in training that I'm most unmotivated to do. Like, when I go to the gym, the last thing I care about and the last thing I put effort in is a bicep curl.
So to that, not that I think I'd like to clarify, I don't think I have particularly large arms, but the thing which changed my mind on that was Jeff Alberts from Team 3DMJ, because he describes he doesn't consider himself someone who trains at very high volumes, but because he's been training for, I think he's in his 50s, so he's been training for like 35 years or whatever. He thinks I've actually done like thousands upon thousands of sets of biceps because I've done 3 sets every week for that long. And I think that's underrated, particularly, or really for any trait, whether we want to talk about muscle growth, strength performance, or like aerobic performance. sometimes your body can only adapt so much in a period of time. And sometimes there's literally no replacement for doing a thing for 5+ years. Which is where I think with the bicep curls, like if you do 3 sets pretty deliberately once or twice a week, you may actually find in 2-3 years time, you've made like appreciable progress.
Yeah. And potentially the same level of progress to you if you did like 20 sets of biceps a week.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. More,
yeah. Your sets would start to be pretty piss weak because you wouldn't be recovering. And like, it's sort of that quality over quantity argument as well, which like, there's been, like maybe this is the perfect segue into training volume now. But like now we've spoken about modality and then we can talk about training volume, but like there's obviously been so much debate on what's the optimal set volume or volume per week and minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable volume, all these volume landmarks. And then there was all this Lyle McDonald shit where he's hammering these other folks for doing 20 sets of a body part per week. And now they hate each other. And it's just like this big internet trolling thing. But anyway, I do think there's a lot of validity just from like a practical enjoyment perspective of quality over quantity. Like you got to ask yourself this question. Like I go surfing, well, not right now because I'm injured, but I pretty much go surfing every single day. And I like the routine of going surfing. Like it's not just about getting the waves and, having good surfs. It's about the routine of doing the movement and just the whole lifestyle thing, right? But if you said to me, Mac, you can go for 2 surfs a week, but they'll be really good surfs, I'll take that over a surf every single day. But if you said to me, Mac, you go for a surf once every month or twice a month, and they'll be really good, I'd take the everyday option. It's like from an enjoyment perspective, there seems to be like a kind of sweet spot in both frequency and overall volume, which obviously contributes to each other.
Yeah, that's where we go back to purpose, like why do you train? And I think, a lot of people listening to this, if if they've been FNC clients before, they might have done things like CrossFit, or they might still even do CrossFit. And there's a big social element to that, right? So that's a big factor as to why they might go every day, right? Or they may train with a buddy or go for runs with a buddy, or they may just really enjoy the routine of moving their body every single day. So matching, again, we go back to matching your volume, your type with your purpose at the end of the day. So that's where you might like to just move every single day. But there also is an argument that more isn't always better. So if you are someone who is trying to progress in a certain field, whether it be with strength or CrossFit or whatever it might be, like more training isn't the answer. And that's where I like to often ask the question of like, the more training you're doing, like, how is that working out for you? Doing it in a quite an empathetic and compassionate way, like not just taking the piss, but like actually how are you going with more volume? Because if it's not working, adding more on top of that won't help either. Maybe just cutting it back a little bit is actually going to be more beneficial for you.
And I think CrossFit are criminals for this, because there's this like almost all the best CrossFitters are trainers and have these sort of schedules and lifestyles which facilitate doing high volumes of training. But there's this massive attitude of like, because the traits you're trying to bring up are pretty varied, let's just throw the kitchen sink at everything, instead of actually setting back and going, okay, intelligently, how do I chase this? And I think really, if you were training with a goal-directed outcome, like we are going, I want to be very good at X, you have to step back and go, okay, what are the requisite traits which would facilitate this performance? And that's like a bigger, fun discussion on training. But I think like specificity is phase specific. It's something Will Berkman used to always say to me. And I think that's so true, particularly if you're trying to juggle a few things. Like, do you need to do 1,000 Metcons, or do you simply need to have more muscle, have a better aerobic system, and have better higher end force output? And once you acknowledge that those are the pieces of that puzzle, you can actually become quite good at the performative aspect of a sport like CrossFit without having to do all that sort of junk where you're sort of not really doing anything that well.
Yeah. More is definitely not better. I think some people get sucked into the whole, like, I need to do as much as possible out of like a routine thing, and I noticed it with surfing. It's like, if you do it every single day, when there's a good swell and it's pumping, you're ready to go. And there's no, like, you don't question your confidence. You're like, oh, I surfed yesterday. I'm in the groove. I don't need like a few waves to get into things, sort of what have you. But at the same time, there, like, whilst that's valid, if you surf too much or if you go to the gym too much, you're not getting anything more out of it. Like, we have obviously a certain, we can only recover or adapt to a given level of stimulus. We can only adapt or make gains. In a layman's terms of saying that would be make gains. We can only make gains at a certain rate. Throwing more volume at it isn't going to get us more gains. It's like, it's a diminishing return. There's a sweet spot. You go beyond that, you probably won't get any more out of it. You might get worse from it even.
Yeah.
And that can be said not just for training, but also surfing as well. Look at me. Like, I went on a surf trip where, you surf heaps and guess what? I got injured. Like, I got injured on a freaking 1 to 2 foot beach break. Shit, just going out because, might as well keep in the groove because it's going to get good in a few days. It's like, this is where we overstep that. And not only do we not see, does the returns diminish, but it also actually goes the other way, and we increase our risk of actually something that could harm us or move us further away from progressing.
Yeah, and I think part of the tricky thing there is sometimes doing lots of training is actually just a response to anxiety. People are scared of not being good enough, and they want to feel like they've done everything possible. But there are, like, that can be true, but then there are also sports where to actually be good or to perform at your best, you need to be putting in relatively large hours and relatively high volumes of training. Like surfing, basically any kind of aerobic sport, you need to be putting out these close to daily training efforts if you really want to sort of chase that potential. And it's acknowledging that, but also trying to be at peace with the fact that there's still an upper limit on what you can do, even if you should be doing it like quite a bit if you want to be the best you can.
Yeah, that's why, like, Tom, a few months ago, you did a post of like, don't look to the best. Like, yes, success leaves clues, but they're different to you. Like, they're outliers. Like you said before, like the best CrossFit athletes, they're also like trainers, or maybe they just they own a gym or they have a program. Like, they don't actually have, yes, it's a real job, but they don't have like a 9 to 5. They don't have families. Like their circumstances aren't the same as yours. So you can't go, oh, I need to just train 4 hours a day when you don't actually have 4 hours a day to train, or like you can't really train 7 days a week because your day-to-day affects your recovery and it also affects your performance. So like if you're training in the evenings but had a stressful day, your performance is likely going to suffer.
Yeah, and like I think I could think of a really good example of that personally for me. In that, like, last year I was training for a marathon and I looked at the data, I looked at the science, and like all of the really, really, really good runners are doing huge Ks. Like we're talking north of 150, 160, 170K a week. So I basically went, okay, if I want to do well at this, I need to do lots of kilometers. Ended up working up to 100K of running a week and just gave myself a horrendous case of shin splints. Whereas this year, I've sort of looked at that and gone, oh, like, I'm not elite. I don't have to do those things. I've just got to do the dose of training, which makes me better. Because you can only adapt at a certain rate, right? So like, I'm going to be better for always being in touch with it than I am for sort of doing a professional level of training load.
You know what? It's fascinating. It really comes back down to that flow state where it's challenging, but it's not like beyond reach. So, however many Ks, 180 or whatever it was, you said the elite guy's doing, like for you, Tom, a couple of years when you did your marathon, for you to do that, that's beyond flow state because you didn't have that training experience. You hadn't built up the endurance or the tolerance the ability to tolerate that. So your flow state is different. It's a unique thing. It's a personal thing. And whilst there are broad trends that we consider, if we look at volume landmarks in hypertrophy training, they're broad, like possible guidelines, like, start with, 8 sets per body part per week and sort of go up from there. It's just like, cool. That's helpful because it gives us a guide, of where roughly might be a good place to be. But shit, there needs to be so much in the trenches and a lot of pragmatism applied, because they're the guidelines doesn't mean shit.
And I think to give like a more actionable step to that, where like human beings, we adapt to stimuli, right? So I would argue the training that presents more of a stimulus than you currently have is probably going to be sufficient to make you better in the beginning. So if you are someone who hasn't gone to the gym in a year, I wouldn't look to volume landmarks to define how much training you do. I'd look at doing more training than you currently are. And it's cool, right? Because we have these volume landmarks, but we also have data suggesting that stuff like walking or cycling can be sufficient to induce hypertrophy in some people if they're detrained enough. So like, if you're not in good nick, like you've lowered the bar so much, you've made it so much easier for you to build those qualities. And then you've got to have this constant reevaluation of, do I need to do more to get better? And is doing more actually worth the squeeze?
Yeah, I think that's where we can use the golden behavior criteria filter of like, what can I do? What do I want to do? And also what's going to bring me a positive impact, not only on my goals, results, but also my quality of life. So matching your type, your volume, your intensity, the amount of sessions that you do. And I think it just comes honestly down to reflection of what you want, and are you progressing towards that life that you want to live as well? And not you looking at, getting so caught up in the weeds of like the volume landmarks of, well, how many sets should I do? Like, let's just start with you moving your body first. Let's start with you training consistently, or sorry, exercising consistently, and looking forward to it, and not doing 1 week where you do 6 sessions and 1 week where you do 0. Like, let's try and figure out how many times a week you can do, consistently every week. Is it, at the moment, I do maximum 3 sessions per week. Like, that's what I can do, like within my schedule. Some weeks it's 2, and that's okay. But I tell you what, I said to Tom before, like the less training I do, the more I enjoy it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like you're enjoying training, and I've noticed also that so many people stress, like in nutrition, about precise little details, or we could call them the little pebbles, when they should be worried about the big rocks or the low-hanging fruit. But I think one reason why people worry about these little details is because they're influenced by external sources and other people. They see people on social media talking about this techie stuff, fancy shit, volume landmarks, precise macros, precise timing. And, those people often come at it from a lens of trying to be optimal. And if that's what they're seeking, great, but it rubs off on people who aren't there. And all of a sudden people are stressing about, and it's like this paralysis by analysis and overthinking, and all of a sudden training nutrition saps such a high amount of mental resources and energy, where it's no longer having a net positive impact on life, and you've actually become fully distracted from the whys behind training and the whys behind why you first got interested in training, or said to yourself, I'm going to get into movement or exercise. You've actually completely left those behind, and they're not even the periphery of your thoughts. You've completely removed yourself from them unintentionally, because your mind is so fixated on these 1%ers that you think you need to be worrying about.
Yeah, I would even say there's a big chunk of the population that do not need to worry about training to failure, that probably don't even need to worry about progressive overload, to be honest. Like, they just need to find exercise that they enjoy and do it consistently. And I think, personal trainers out there, they're obsessed with posting shit about training to failure and progressive overload. It's like, have you even figured out or asked your clients what they want from training?
Yeah. And it's fascinating because, like, when I used to be into my more gym phase, I'd see people doing dumb shit in the gym, and I look at that and I think to myself, oh, they're just wasting their time. Like, I wish I'd go up and help them, and that's not optimal. They're not going to failure on that exercise. They're going to have to do 1,000,000 reps to go to failure on those booty band things. And bloody yesterday, I was in Fitness First Bondi Junction, and then there's this lady jiu-jitsuing a freaking foam roller. She's like on top of the thing doing like elbows into the thing. And I looked at that and I thought, you're enjoying yourself, you're moving your body, you're challenging yourself, good on you.
He's Shannon in Sydney.
No.
Well, but I think, like, to bat for the other team on that one, like, those are things that matter in like a sequential order, right? So if you're someone who's not turning up and you want, and you want X outcome, you want to be stronger, you want bigger biceps. If you're not showing up, you need to show up. Then if you are showing up consistently, we can start asking questions. When you're showing up, what are you doing? And then like, is training sufficiently hard? Are you doing sufficient volume? Is the outside environment conducive to adaptation? You can start asking those questions. But I think a lot of trainers like to start there because it's easier to sell. Like it's much easier for me. Well, I can go up to someone and dude, like, haven't you read the latest meta-analysis? I haven't read the analysis. I read one of Greg Knuckles' posts. But yeah, haven't you read that analysis which says that we should be biasing line of pull and longer muscle lengths or whatever? But like, and then you sort of put this fear into someone and they go, oh no, like, I didn't think about that. Am I wasting my time? Like,
it's like the gut health thing, bro. It's like, oh, you get bloated, bro. Your gut health, it's good, but it's not super gut health. You need super gut health. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. That's like, why you're trying to lose weight, but you're failing because you don't have super gut health. I have the solution. Pay me money.
Yeah. And like, how often are those problems just a part of the human condition too? Like I've been lifting weights for 11 years. I'm someone who's done sport all my life. I love training. I'm not enormously muscular. And because I've done that for so long, there's probably no one thing which will suddenly change that.
Well,
like there might be a thing which makes me 2 or 3% better, but I think for the larger point, like it's the time in the game and it's the effort you apply which make you better. But I think people who are dissatisfied via comparison, and there's like that discussion of like the whole fake natty problem, right? You get these blokes doing like TRT and going, oh, the reason my physique is this way is because of this exercise selection or this protocol. When in reality, it's not actually a thing that best explains the variance between individuals.
Also, like, for so long, I tried to deny this in my muscle building journey back, a few years ago. For so long, I tried to deny this. Genetics. Like, it's undeniable that someone can be doing some absolute dumb shit. You can be doing the optimal thing and they're more jacked than you and they're always going to be more jacked than you. And I just refused to accept it. I was like, nah, it's because I'm doing something wrong. Oh, it's because like I'm not optimizing my blah, 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 blah. And even got sucked into the gut health thing at one point, and at the end of the day, like it's legit. Genetics are huge, especially in a muscle building setting or just any sports setting. Genetics are undeniably such a big factor, and you can be trying as hard as you can, but if your genetics aren't conducive to that sport or exercise modality, old mate over there is always going to be better than you. And I think that's a big reason why comparison is a big issue. And, that's when we start talking about body image and everything, which is we're not going to go into that, but it's a similar concept. Like, others.
Yeah, and I think that ties in nicely to that idea of like, do you want a process you can dedicate yourself to? Or are you like just looking for validation? Because I think bodybuilding is the best, if not the best, one of the best examples of this. You could have really mediocre genetics for bodybuilding, but you could just love it. You could love getting the pump. You could love training hard. You could love doing the nutrition thing. You could love bulking and cutting and all the parts of that game. And I would argue that if you genuinely love those things, that's sufficient to do it, even if you've got bad genetics.
Yeah.
Because like, who cares? This is about you engaging in the pursuit. But it's when we look over the pond where we have the different questions.
You can still, like, the thing is, even though genetics are such a huge factor, you can still probably attain a pretty respectable physique with shit genetics. You can still be a pretty okay surfer if you just unco AF. You can probably be all right at CrossFit if like I could probably be all right at CrossFit if I really wanted to, but I'm never going to be Matt Fraser.
You mean Mac Fraser?
I could be Mac Fraser though.
Yeah, I'd say like if we step away from like the genetics of like bodybuilding, but like coordination is a really big thing when it comes to CrossFit. Like there are some people where I'm like, your coordination, I just don't know where to start. Whereas like naturally, some people can come into the gym and pick something up straight away, like a double under or a muscle up or handstand push up, just from being coordinated. Whereas some their body awareness, they just don't quite have it.
Yeah.
So it does make it a lot harder as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like if we look at surfing, there are people who you just look at and you're just like, oh, got no hope. But truth be told, I'm like, not truth be told, but I'm still of the opinion that if they committed themselves to doing it, it's just when you shit at something and it's not really your fault, you're just like not geared for that. Like me being a bodybuilder, like, it was only a matter of time before I burnt out. I wasn't a bodybuilder, actually. I was more of just someone who wanted to get jacked. But it was only a matter of time before I burnt out because I was shit. Like, in school, I was always endurance guy, endurance mountain biking, cross country running. I was never sprint guy. I was never rugby guy. So like,
Mate, didn't you play in the Fs for rugby?
Yeah, 16 Gs or some shit.
No, but you went to a private school, so it counts for like 5 times, right?
Yeah, I went to a private school. Yeah, I was in like the 16 Gs and all that shit. It was great.
Yeah. Well, and again, like I think it makes you think about what the point is, right? And I don't mean that in like a dark nihilistic sense, but like if you're actually doing this to be the best in the world,
you're always going to be failing that.
Yeah. I could talk to you all day about the fact that when you get really into a thing, you just push the boundary of what good is. You just kick that can further down the road. And you can get to a point where past you would have been so proud of what you've done, but you're actually miserable with what you're doing now because there's some dude on the internet who's just so much better than you.
Yeah. It's just like, again, using surfing, like the only person on this planet who's probably going to say like, oh, I'm the best is Kelly Slater. Even Mick Fanning, who's won 3 world titles, is going to be like, well, Kelly's won 11. So you're always like wanting to be the best in the world. Like you're always going to come up disappointed. And then Kelly's probably like, well, there are all these free surfers who don't compete, who like charge and are really good, and they're probably better than me. So it's like a lose-lose. So it's this whole thing of like, loving the process versus just wanting to be the best. And, for some people, they say they're motivated by wanting to be the best, and that's cool. But the reality of the matter is they're never going to be the best.
Yeah, especially when we're trying to talk to like the general population as well. Like, yeah, there's some people that want to take things seriously, but if we're just onto like the everyday person, like, just like, what do you want to get out of this? Like, do you want to, see improvements? Do you want to be healthier and fitter? Like, then you don't have to compare yourself to other people so much either.
And I think to that as well, pick the right process. You don't have to love this thing. Like, I love going to the gym and I love running, and I just like exercise really. But like, I also get that there are people who don't like that. And if you're someone who doesn't like going to the gym, you may still want some of those gym adjacent benefits. You might want better bone density, better muscles. You then have to ask, if this thing is in line with my values, what process or what thing will help me get there, which I like or at least don't hate.
And if you want better bone density and just like better muscles in little bunny ears, obviously that's a pretty broad thing. You don't necessarily need to go to the gym and follow a periodized program. Like for most people, like for example, I think about my mum, right? She's in her 60s. She's had low bone mass. Last year she tore her hamstring off the bone. Like, she's at risk of sort of that sarcopenia type, conundrum and vicious cycle. And it's like, okay, what should my mum do to get, she doesn't like training. She doesn't like going to the gym, but what should she do to improve her bone density and increase her strength? She doesn't need to go to the gym and do a periodized program. Like anything. She loves tennis. Great, do tennis, like just as long as you're loading the muscles, you're really doing that job. And like I said, it doesn't need to be this like periodized program. Just load the muscles. See, again, goal, increase bone mass, increased muscle strength, and just general how robust the body is. Okay, principles: load the body, load the muscles, load the bones. Okay, well, to achieve that principle, what are all the things that we can do?
Yeah, and
like this long.
Yeah, and like to be fair, like someone in that boat, they like they may get so much out of going to the gym for half an hour a week, sitting on some machines, and then afterwards go out for coffee with your mates, or do something nice which you can sort of associate with the activity. But you don't have to be a bro. You can play tennis and then go once. No one's telling you can't or shouldn't ever lift a weight, but it's more that it doesn't necessitate that extreme other end of the spectrum.
Bro, I used to train at the Sydney Football Stadium gym, SNA, sorry, not SNA, Sydney
Freudian slip.
SFS, in Moore Park, right? And there's all these old blokes in there. Like, it's one of those gyms where they've got the sauna, and you walk in there and there's like just these old blokes fucking full naked, and you're like, oh my God, please.
Is that what I'm gonna look like when I grow up?
You're like, please put a towel on, buddy, please. Anyway, so there was all of these old blokes in that gym, and they're sitting on the machines and they're, doing this one. And I used to think to myself, I'm like, oh, bro, you're not full ROM, you're not getting the failure there. Like, oh, I wish I could come in and like, tweak your technique and help you hit the maximum RIR, this and that. And like, it's just, I think back to that, I'm like, what do those guys want from training? They don't, like, at that point in my life, I was viewing training through my own lens and no one else's. I was just like, this is why you train. This is what you want from training. And I was looking at this old bloke in the gym being like, that's not optimal for a goal that's mine, not yours. And me thinking that that's terrible and like, oh my God, this guy's so stupid, blah, 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 blah. And now I think back on that, I'm like, this guy's getting exactly what he wants from training. He's enjoying it. And it's much better than him sitting on the couch or sitting in the pub drinking beer. So like, that's awesome.
Yeah, I really like that. I think it's a really good spot to finish up with, Mac. I think it's like, are you getting what you want out of it? Like, and if you are, then great, don't change it. But if you aren't, then explore your options. Like, try something different, train less, like, be open to other possibilities, because it's not just the gym. It's not just more training that is going to lead to a better outcome. Like, there's so many options that you can try and explore, like, and just play around with things.
Yeah. But like in a lot of instances, like for example, me a couple of years ago, reduce your training would have been like red flags, alarm bells. Oh my God, I'm like the worst. Everything's going to happen. So I think like helping people go through like their ambivalence, what's the worst that can happen? What's the most logical outcome? What would you tell a friend? Like all those sort of things can be really helpful, because it's certainly understandable why, if you're someone who's like really obsessed with the CrossFit, but that it's actually bringing like a lot of like anxiety to your life and you feel guilty when you can't do it, it's completely understandable to hear people say things like train less and you're like freaking out, panicking. So we understand that. We're not just saying, oh, it's easy, just train less. No, we understand why that's hard.
Yeah. And it's about, actually challenging those beliefs. Like you said, if you're training 3 hours a day, not getting any better, like, ask yourself, like, do I need to recover more to give my body a chance to adapt? Am I physically and mentally burnt out? Like, and then what do I really think will happen if I had a rest day?
And even if you just try it as an experiment.
Yeah, experiments are great.
2 weeks where I go down to 3 days a week rather than 6.
Yeah.
See what happens. Oh, I feel better. I'm actually enjoying my training more because I'm getting more quality. You might actually realize that there's all benefits and no cons, and that you've learned something there. But you don't learn that stuff unless you do the experiment.
Exactly right. Yeah, you got to learn through.
What's the trade-off of not doing the experiment?
Yeah, learn through experiment and then reflection.
Exactly.
Tom, any closing thoughts, mate?
Lift big, eat big, get big.
Thank you. Great input. Yeah. I think actually, Tom, can you finish on something that you said to me a while ago about like, you can still really maintain your health and strength by doing like, what's the absolute minimum it is? It's like something crazy. Yeah.
There's like comfortable data saying a third of your set volume a week. And there's some, you could even make a case going as low as a ninth. And often I think, particularly if you're struggling with a higher volume, the absence of niggles and like the extra energy you'll have will actually probably outweigh it. Like I almost, probably 80% of the time I get someone new, I reduce their volume, especially if they've been managing themselves or had a real bro coach.
Yeah, I must say I really enjoy not being sore anymore.
Yeah, well, like if you're constantly training through niggles, like particularly a lot of fellas who are enhanced, the biggest problem becomes keeping people healthy. So if you're constantly training through niggles, you'll probably actually get better if you don't have as many niggles, as opposed to going from 15 sets of squats a week to 18.
Yeah. Isn't it like, it just sounds like common sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it's to be fair, like I've done so many dumb things with my own training and nutrition. Like it's much easier as a third party to go, hey, this is like, let's pull this apart. It's kind of stupid. But that's always giving yourself space for reflection and to step back and ask those questions. What do I actually want? How am I going to get there? Do I enjoy this? Is like so important.
Definitely. All right, lads, really enjoy that. Again, thank you very much. Just, yeah, really cool to have some different insights, not talking about nutrition today, but yeah, still something that we're all passionate about. We do love moving our bodies and exercising. We've gone through different, journeys ourselves, both personally and professionally when it comes to exercise and training as well. So just thought I'd have a different focus for today's podcast.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, lads. Catch us the next week or next fortnight.